Hi there, it's Mark back with another Lightroom tutorial, and today we're going to be taking another look at masks. I already have a series of videos on masks which you might want to check out after you've watched this one, but not before. While I've got you, stay here please, thank you. And we're going to look at this particular picture. It's nothing to write home about, but this is just a picture because it's got some interesting shapes and things we're going to work with, because what I want to take away today is our approach to how to identify objects and how to isolate objects, often by combining and intersecting masks. So we'll take this picture and we'll do a basic edit on it to add a bit more definition and depth, and then we will use masking techniques to identify each of the concentric circles they're in so we can do something with them. In this case I've just coloured them because, well, why not? However, you lose a bit of depth sometimes when you're doing things like colouring, so we'll use masks again to add that depth back in. It's not important what this picture is, it's more important about the skills and the approach that we're going to take. So we'll start simple. We'll start with this box, and we will show how with masking we apply or paint an effect, be it a colour or exposure or whatever, outside of the box, and yet what we're doing will only appear inside the box. So I promise you that's actually a useful skill for adding depth to pictures, but it's intriguing nonetheless. So if you want to satisfy your intrigue, assuming you are indeed intrigued, then download the pictures we're going to be working on today. They're in a link, and that link is down below in the video notes if you want to go and get those. I will roll the titles, and therefore in 7 seconds we will meet again, and we'll roll our sleeves up and we'll get masking. Okay, so here is our first picture, and these are the things we're going to recap on because I think it's worth doing a little recap to establish a common understanding of the terms that we're going to be using. Let's go to local adjustments. Now, local adjustments, you can choose masks for landscapes, objects, people, faces, eyes, clothing, colours, luminosities. Now, a mask identifies, targets, confines your edit to that mask. But with a brush, there's no identification of anything. You are free-forming with a brush. So let's set flow and density to full on this brush, feather off. Let's preload the brush with -4 exposure just so we can see it more easily. And I'll draw a straight line. How do you draw a straight line with a brush? You simply click, hold down your shift, and move your cursor. I'm going to move my cursor to the right, but notice I'll stop bringing it down now. It doesn't matter because I locked it the direction with the shift key. Although I'm bringing my cursor down, it still continues to the right. Leave go my mouse, leave go my shift. There's a brush, fully loaded, no feather. Let's put 100% feather on and repeat that. Click here and drag it across. Now when we get into this feathering is very important because it is this fall off that is our friend for adding internal shadows. Not this, which is harsh, but it's this. Forget about the overall size of this brush. Just consider from where my cursor is now upwards. That gradient, that's what we're going to be working with to do internal shadows and things. But I digress. We need to finish working out what the brushes do. So I'll put the feather back to 0 to make it easier to demonstrate flow and density. So what is flow? Well, we've got a -4 exposure. Let's bring flow to about 10. And let's just paint. Notice how it's building up. Let's do it on the grey. So each time I'm swiping with my brush, it's adding a little bit more. And it takes a few brush strokes to get us back up to the overall colour we saw before. So flow is the amount of paint you've got on a brush, the amount of effort, the amount of brush strokes you have to take to get up to the resulting maximum, the resulting density. Which in itself is a good thing, because it means that you could have -4 exposure and you could just subtly come in and put little shadows in and things like that with exposure if that's what you wanted. Now density itself is that maximum. So I'm going to put my flow up to 100 and I'm going to take my density down to 5. And we've still got -4. And if I brush now, you can hardly see it. I've hit the maximum. It doesn't matter how many times I go over it with my brush with flow at 100. So I've got the maximum amount of paint, for want of a better word, on my brush. I can't get more dense than 5. Or in this case, I can't get more dense than 40. Or can't get more dense than 70. Now let's combine the two for the most control you can have. Let's just put, I don't know, density at about 33 and flow at about 15. Arbitrary figures. But now, even with a massive -4, I can actually just gently stroke in and I can build them up if I want to build it up and not. So now I've got this variable application of exposure. It's not just one setting. Alright, so that's the brush elements of it. Let's quickly do add, subtract, and so on. Let's put a radial gradient on. Just put it in the middle here. No particular reason. And let's get rid of the feather. And let's bring negative exposure. Now, let's look at subtract. I'm going to subtract with a brush. My brush is quite big. Bring it down. And I'm just going to do the straight line thing. Click here once. Hold down my shift and drag down. And just move my brush up and down. I've still got my shift key held. Flow and density are low. Let's bump them all the way up so we'll see a quicker effect here, shall we? So subtraction, dead easy. What if I want to add to this mask? Well, let's click add and let's add with a radial gradient. There you go. Let's subtract with a brush. Let's add with another radial gradient. Let's subtract with a radial gradient. Let's subtract with a radial gradient and give it a lot of feather. So there you have it. We've got a means of adding, subtracting, adding, subtracting, adding, subtracting. You don't necessarily have to try and fix everything with one mask. You can do multiples. And notice how I subtracted with a full no feather and with a feather. What we're going to be looking at, remember, is fall off. It's how we're going to use these. So that's very important. The final thing to look at is intersection. So let us delete all masks. Let's select this square. I don't know, let's try object selection and use the little object selection tool there. Hopefully it'll get the whole thing. And now let us intersect with a brush. And let's get a nice big feather on the brush. Let's bring the size of that brush up. Let's preload it with some exposure. And it's only when I stop painting that it will intersect. So my brush is up there, it doesn't overlap yet, but look at what's happening now. My brush is way above the square. I'm painting on the outside, yet the effect is on the inside. And that is the secret to what we're going to be doing. Find the best way of selecting the object such that we can paint on the outside and therefore bring in this internal shadow. Go and have a coffee. I'm going to pause now and I'm going to have a coffee. And then we'll get cracking with practical examples. If this didn't make sense up to now, while you're drinking your coffee, replay this part. Okay, so here's our first main picture. It's a little bit too bright. Let's do a bit of an edit on it. I'm going to just use auto. Why not? And that's a little bit too dark insofar as it drawing too many blues in for me, so I'm just going to move the exposure back a little bit. I'm add some clarity to get some edge contrast in there, and possibly a bit of a vignette under effects just to draw the eye in. Not so much as to do that, but just to draw the eye in. And that's it. We're now set to move on. So let's add our first mask. Radial gradient is obviously the way to go. Now I want to try and grab this first circle, so I'm going to arbitrarily just click here and drag, and I can move to the side, I can move up and down, I can get some sort of shape going, and then leave go, click and reposition. And you know what, that wasn't too bad as a guess, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'd stopped there and been far short and off the mark. Two things to note: because we're trying to match a good circle, it helps if you haven't got a feather. And secondly, when you're in a radial gradient, once you leave go, you can actually draw the sides out by clicking the side and pulling, or top and bottom. Now I'm clicked at the bottom here, but it's moving the top as well. If you want to just move one side, so here I'll just marry the left side up. If I hold down my Option or Alt key, that's Option key on a Mac, Alt key on a PC, click and drag, it only moves that side, which is the precision you need to match any sort of circle with this. So there is our first circle. Now we want to subtract from that a circle. So let's subtract radial gradient. I'll hold down my Shift key so that when I draw it out, it does a perfect circle. I'll guess at that by leaving go, and I wasn't too far off, was I? So let's do the same thing again. I need to hold down my Option or Alt key and click the bottom and drag it out, and my side there and there. I've now very precisely identified that whole ring. So this is where we can now recolor it. I'm not fussed what color I do here, it's irrelevant. It's the technique. So I am going to color it to green and possibly darken it as well. So there's our first one, which is done in green. Let's do one more. I'll skip one and I'll do the next one. I'll leave you to do all the others. So let's go and create new mask. Radial gradient. You could of course copy those masks and retweak them, but it's just as easy to do them again. So roughly about there. Put it in to the left. Hold down my Option key or Alt key and drag that out to get it precise. Up to there and down to there. Then subtract with a radial gradient somewhere around there. Let's get that into the side. Option or Alt key, drag it across, drag up and drag down. That outer one hasn't quite worked, if you notice there, so click back on the outer one, Option or Alt key. You can always revisit masks whenever you want. You can revisit them. Okay, so I'm now happy with that. Let's colour that one as well. So we'll go for that colour. We'll bump the saturation up and we'll try and tint it a little bit more there. And now you can see there's clearly a spill. So my masking out hasn't quite worked there. Well, that's no problem. Let's go on the -1, the one which was the inner one. Click on it. Hold down my Option or Alt key and just bump that up a tiny little bit more. And now let's have a look. There you are, fixed. So we've actually managed to fix that one as well, and so on and so forth to go back through the colours. Now what about this shadow? Well, let's do the painting outside method and then I'll show you a better method for this particular circumstance. Okay, so let's use this one here, and we're going to want to be painting in from the outside. So let's duplicate this. So duplicate mask 2. There's mask 2. Let's get rid of the subtraction. So now I've just got the mask all the way in. I'm not interested in the clarity that we put in place or the color changes that we made. So that was to whichever of these we altered. Double click on the word to get rid of them. I just want that mask. So now we've got that mask without anything changed. I want to intersect. So hold down my Option or Alt key, intersect with a brush. My brush has got quite a big feather on it, as you can probably see faintly. I'm going to add some exposure. I can always alter the exposure later. And I'm going to start on the outside and just do what we did before, which was to brush around so that it creeps in from the outside. My brush is far too big on this one. So on the outside, and just brush so that intersect comes in like so. And before and after is where we've come to. Now, there is an easier way to do it when you have something as precisely regular as this. So let us go back, and I'll do this from scratch. So let's go back to the first circle, and we'll create a radial gradient, which is going to be covering the first circle. Option or Alt key to drag these in. And subtract from that another radial gradient. This time we want the radial gradient to be very close. Option or Alt key to the edges. And let's add some exposure. Now then, two things. One, my first radial gradient didn't get up to the top. There's a little green gap. So let's just go back to that one and just Option or Alt key, lift it up a little bit. Okay, let's come back to this one. That doesn't look right. But if I now feather this, see how I'm bringing that edge in because I've got a feather, and then it's just a case of rolling off the exposure. Heavy-handed with exposure because it helps your eyes see exactly what's going on, and that's no bad thing, and then roll it out. So let's just do that one again just to cement that understanding. Delete mask 3. So what we did was we created a radial gradient which covered the first circle. Hold our Option or Alt key just to get it all in, and this time because we were shy last time, I'll make sure I've got it right at the top. Get rid of that feather. Then we subtract from that another radial gradient, but we took this one close to the edge. That's this one. Close to the edge. Option or Alt key just to bring it in to there. Possibly a little bit too close, but we'll see. And then we added loads of exposure, and the secret sauce was in then feathering that. And once you've got it feathered, you then roll back the exposure to suit. And how's about that for getting an internal shadow, all with just a few masks? And I will leave you to do the others, so you can let me know how you get on with those in comments. Hopefully that was self-explanatory. Hopefully that explains how once you get a mask, you don't have to do something inside it with a brush. You can do something outside and it will leak in, and that gives you a great deal of opportunities for doorways, windows, even edge lighting on portrait pictures, and so on and so forth. Which brings us to our final picture, for which I'll just give you some examples. Now I want to accentuate a light coming in from the left hand side across this picture. So first thing I want to do is add more of a shadow coming down the right hand side. Now the shadow will have fall off, it'll be a gradient. So how would I approach that? Well, first thing that strikes me is this is an object. So let us try and select that as an object. See how well it chooses it. That's very precise. Now I actually don't want that, I want everything bar that, at least down this side. So I'm actually going to invert the selection. Now that I've inverted the selection, I will then, well, one, I'll zoom in using my Control and Plus keys. That's all repositioned. I will then intersect, so that's my Option key on a Mac, Alt key on a PC, using a brush, and I want a feather on my brush. So let's bring it down a little bit, brush size a little bit bigger. I'm going to bring down the flow and density because I don't want to go over the top with this, or rather bring down the flow. There's no such thing as the density when you're doing this, and I will heavy-handedly cook my exposure so I can better see what I'm doing, and I'll start painting inside the doorway to outside the doorway. Now see, my brush is clearly on the inside there, and then you'd roll it in because it wouldn't come right out the top. Get that feather going, increase the feather some more, brush size a little bit bigger, paint from further in this time, and just creep that shadow out, and then as you approach the top of the door you bring it in. And now that's a bit heavy-handed, but that's just so I could see it. So now, before and after, we've added that. Now if I wanted to do that, I would also have a shadow down the inside on this side. So this time I will select an object, being the door, and I don't want to invert it this time. I want to intersect, so hold down my Option or Alt key, intersect with a brush. I will bring my exposure heavy-handed, and I'll start on the outside, and I'll just start painting till I see it coming in. This time, because the door is small, I think my brush is a bit too big, so I'll bring my brush down, and I want to come there and get that edge done there, and then roll it out like that. So now we've got before and after, really defining those things there. We could, if we were really wanting to be precise, do it on each edge of the arch. So how would we go about that? Well, just because it's an exercise, let's have a go now at adding with a brush with auto mask on, which means it will try not to go outside the edges. It'll try and detect the edges. Now I'm going to bring my brush size down. I'm just going to pick one arch to roughly the right size, and I'm just going to paint in here like this archway. And then I want to intersect, so Option or Alt key, intersect with a brush, and this time start painting from the outside, and I should start to get a shadow just creeping in the inside of that, and then darken it off. You see how that's coming in? Now you do the same for this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge to match what we're doing with the door. Let's move down to these. If we wanted to continue the theme, we could now select an object, and I'm going to try and select all the stairs, see what it does. That's not bad. This time I'm going to intersect with a linear gradient. I'm going to start my linear gradient outside and just bring it in, so I'm just getting a feathered on the stairs, possibly bring it a little bit wider. There, and then I'll bring my exposure down, start to get that creeping in. We could come down now. Let's go with a brush, and we could come down with that straight line technique. So get the brush to match the size of the inner part of the post. There, add a little bit of a feather to it, and let's come down from there, click, come all the way down to the bottom, shift, click, and then add a little bit of exposure on the front, and we could start to paint in those. That wasn't as successful because I think it's got that auto mask on, so I'm going to delete that one and do it again. We don't edit on these pictures, everyone makes mistakes, so we'll try that again. So delete mask 5. Let's get another brush in there. We'll make the brush more feathered but smaller, and I'm going to start there, click, come down to the bottom, shift and click, and this time just a little bit more into the edge. And then let's zoom out. Bearing in mind we then would do the rest of them, let's have a look at the before and after. And we're starting to add more depth, more texture, more layers to this picture. And that's it. I'm not going to bore you with doing the whole thing. Hope you like these techniques. I hope you have a go at practicing them. Let me know how you get on. And click that subscribe button if you think, I nearly said subscribe. Click that subscribe button if you think you're getting things from this. Give it a thumbs up if you like it. Ring the notification bell as well to be notified of new videos. And with that, because it's turning out to be quite a long video, I'm out of here. It's coffee time. Bye for now.